I would say we started dreaming about this maybe like a month or two in advance, specifically to show California can do this. We can actually discharge sunlight when the sun is down. And that was really exciting about it.
What if utilities never had to ask their customers to use less electricity? What if, in the event of an emergency, hundreds of megawatts or more of behind-the-meter resources could be instantly deployed to address any shortfall concerns? This summer, key stakeholders across the state of California teamed up for a first-of-its-kind coordinated test of virtual power plant, or VPP, capabilities. Thousands of Sunrun systems, Tesla Powerwalls, panels, and batteries across C&I applications all dispatched to the grid at once and delivered a whopping 535 megawatts, reducing net load during the evening peak and successfully demonstrating the potential impact that distributed energy resources can have. This test went beyond the technology. It was about delivering resilience where and when it's needed most. On this episode of the podcast, I'm proud to welcome Kendrick Li, who handles demand response for Pacific Gas and Electric Company, one of the three huge California utilities that teamed up for this test. We'll start by going 101 for listeners unfamiliar with VPP technology, and then get deeper into the weeds on how these systems work, how they might be deployed, and what the roadblocks are to larger customer adoption. I'm Paul Gerke, and you're listening to Factor This. I'm excited to finally get to talk about one of the coolest things happening in the grid space. I've been waiting to have this conversation with PG&E's Kendrick Li. Kendrick Li is the director of clean energy programs, works in demand response for one of the largest utilities in the United States out in California. They recently had this very cool event, a historic milestone in the virtual power plant space that we're going to get into the weeds about. But first, Kendrick, I want to say thank you so much for taking some time to join us on the Factor This podcast. And for those who are new to the space, can you give us the 101? Like, what is a virtual power plant?
Yeah, Paul, thanks for having me on the podcast. Well, here's the 101. It's actually more like physics 101. And in electricity, supply and demand curves don't equal. Bad things start happening on the grid. Classically, we've always addressed this through the supply side. If demand is high, we bring on more generators. Well, with renewable energy and solar and wind coming on at parts of the day that may not necessarily align with when people use energy, the load curve now has to start matching the supply curve in its shape. So virtual power plant is a way of manipulating the load curve, whether up and down, to achieve a shape that matches the supply shape so that they roughly equal out.
Okay, so that sounds good in theory, but how does a utility like PG&E harness the power of a virtual power plant?
Traditionally, we've actually asked people and businesses to use less energy during peak periods when, let's say, California is having a heat wave day, there's an emergency status on the grid, there's no more energy available to be imported because guess what? All the other Western states are having this emergency too. So your last lever you pull is dropping the electric demand. And PG&E traditionally did that by asking businesses and customers to just use lower energy during those periods of the day. In the modern world, we have more tools now. So we can actually do a couple things. One is automated dispatch from machine to machine, such as a network signal to an internet-connected thermostat or an EV charger. One of the most exciting things we're seeing now is actually the ability to do the same thing, an internet-connected signal, but to a battery, and specifically a battery that's behind the meter, owned by a home or by a business. And when you turn that on, that can actually help the grid greatly if it's all done in concert.
Taking advantage of distributed energy resources, a topic that we talk about quite a bit on this show, the strength of many, if you will. And PG&E just had a pretty significant test that we alluded to a moment ago. Can you tell me about this historic event and what you guys did last month?
Yeah, sure thing. So in July, this 2025, we exercised a capability for a test event. So not an actual emergency day, but we pretended, what if this was such an emergency day on the West Coast where energy was just really tight and California needed to do something to address it before actually suffering blackouts. And it wasn't just PG&E. This is done together with the state's DSGS program, with Southern California Edison, and with San Diego Gas and Electric. And that was really the power of it. It was the first time we coordinated all these entities and decided we would all turn on the behind-the-meter customer-owned batteries at the same time. And this time happened to be between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m., which is when the load peak would have been that day. And we exercised slightly over half a gigawatt, so over 500 megawatts of batteries. And just as a scale of comparison, that's almost as big as Oroville or Shasta Dam. Those are the only two large hydro dams in California that would have been bigger than this battery discharge. It's also roughly about half of a nuclear reactor at Diablo Canyon, so it's quite sizable.
Yeah, quite a bit. You hear people talk about solar as not being dispatchable. This is one of those instances where it obviously is. How long did you run the test? 2 hours, give or take, and how did it go?
Yeah, it was 2 hours, and
Okay.
it went really well. I mean, we all knew that technology worked because we've been dispatching these for our own purposes. We've just never coordinated together as a California-wide fleet. And it definitely really went really well. The California ISO, which is the air traffic control, if you will, for energy in
I like
California,
that.
um, they definitely noticed, and we gave them a heads up at a time to coordinate just to make sure there wouldn't be an issue of actually having too much supply all of a sudden. And they definitely noticed, and they told us that in a follow-up meeting. The interesting thing about battery VPPs compared to regular other types of demand response programs is that these things are machine to machine, so they don't say no. They turn on instantly and they turn off instantly. So we learned about that. We'll probably have a ramping curve next time to make it more smooth for the grid. But I thought it went really well, and all of our partners saw the same effect.
I didn't even think about that. Let's get in the weeds a little bit. We've got some real engineering wonks that listen to this podcast. I had never considered the fact that it's sort of an instantaneous on in the amount. I mean, 535 megawatts, I think it was, all coming out at once, and it didn't cause any harm. But that could obviously in the future if we did something like that at an even larger scale, I assume.
Well, that was our feeling, Paul, that at this scale of about half a gigawatt, it wouldn't be harmful, but there would be a noticeable effect. And I think our hypothesis was right. Luckily, our control centers at the various utilities and also the ISO were ready for this. So if there were an issue, we could have solved it. But I think when we're talking about in the future, if this grows, and maybe it's not an if, it's more of a when, if we're exercising 1,000 megawatts at once for those 2 hours, would there be actually a frequency change on the Western grid? And yes, there probably would be. At that point, we'll probably need to look at ramping. And the ISO has actually requested, if we ever get to that size, we need to start planning this the day ahead in the energy market. So maybe we procure a little less energy during such an event.
How long did you plan for this? Was this something that had been in the works for a while? I know that utilities can often work in silos. I bet just haranguing those three major utilities was tough enough.
Normally, that would be the case for a lot of things between large companies.
Yeah.
But the three utilities have actually exercised our battery fleet in unison a few times before. That was not new to us. We just didn't do it together also with the DSCS batteries operated by Sunrun and Tesla and getting everyone on the same page. Planning for it wasn't that hard because each individual entity had done it before, but I would say we started dreaming about this maybe like a month or two in advance, specifically to show California can do this. We can actually discharge sunlight when the sun is down, and that was really exciting about it. I think the difficulty was not knowing what the results were, but now that we do it, we're quite relieved and happy about it.
You talked about Sunrun and Tesla. Who are the players in this space that are helping actualize this distributed energy future that it seems that we're waltzing into?
I think the number one kudos I would give out is actually to customers and businesses who are installing batteries themselves for their own purposes. They're doing this for backup reasons, to save energy from high peak periods, to save on their bill. But I would say the customers are driving this because they see a need to install these technologies in their businesses or their homes. So that's great. But yeah, Sunrun is definitely a big implementer. Tesla is one of the largest battery manufacturers that actually has connected batteries that we can talk to through internet signals. So that's very important to us. And then I think also maybe a less called out partner is the policymakers of California that have enabled this to happen. There's definitely more things we can do to encourage it, to make it more economical. And I don't think we even need subsidies. We just need to create rule sets that make this easy and less friction for everyone involved. But yeah, I would start there with those partners.
Forgive my ignorance. I've never been a part of a VPP that's deployed before. Are the homeowners and businesses compensated in that instance?
Yeah, they sure are. So some maybe early adopters are really aware of what's going on, but the average customer, including people who work for us at PG&E, who I think would be utility nerds, but they're also Sunrun or Tesla customers, I literally asked one of them, did you notice this test event in July? It was a pretty big deal for me because I'm in the space.
Yeah.
And he said, like, I say, no, let me open up the app. And he opened it in front of me and he said, oh yeah, it looks like there was a discharge and I'm going to get a certain benefit out of it in dollars. And that's cool. It saves on my bill. But that actually honestly should be the experience for the customer, that it's relatively invisible. It doesn't cause them any inconvenience and they get paid for that benefit.
I had a conversation about this time last year with Chris Rauscher of Sunrun, who said something to the effect of, and this is a quote that went really well in the article that I used it in, but has stuck with me ever since. Customers don't care about virtual power plants. Customers care about cold beer and warm showers. The best way to saturate that VPP market and get people on board is to make it a seamless, effortless experience where all that friction is removed, where even if you really care about the VPP you're a part of, you might not notice that it actually discharged. Does that sound fair to you?
I think that definitely resonates with me. We have a saying too, or maybe not a saying. We have a stat in the utility world where our customers like to interact with us maybe 3 minutes a year, and they actually prefer it that way. Now, not all brands or all companies will think of their customer base that way, but for us, if we are mostly invisible to the customer, you turn on that device, you turn on your light switch, it works. You're set up on auto bill and it just pays and it's not such an amount that becomes a burden. That would be the dream experience for utility if it's truly invisible. So yeah, I would be definitely in line with.
I think there's a lot of power in bouncing around a little bit here. I apologize, but I think there's a lot of power in bringing together those three California utilities united on one matter or another. We saw in recent years the California Wildfire Fund, where they came together to put some money together. Of course, unfortunately, the Eaton fires last year seemed to have more than exhausted what was in that fund. But the point of it here is collaboration. The point of it is we're facing these grid challenges together. Well, whether it's load growth facilitated by data centers and AI, or it's wildfire challenges in California. What do you think a test like this, and really in totality, the fact that they're working together so closely, what do you think this means for CAISO or Californians moving forward? Is this the dawn of a new era of sort of utility cooperation?
Well, I certainly hope so, and I do read it that way because all of the utilities and the ISO, and I would say even the Western North American grid is tied together. Our fates are tied. So if one area of the grid is severely short, the others can contribute. But if one of the areas of the grid cannot export or contribute, that also causes a problem. But it's definitely a new era because the technology is there and the economics are becoming there. So the ability to store solar and wind or any kind of grid energy now exists. The technology to dispatch it and orchestrate it through even AI over the internet exists. The last piece I'm personally waiting for is for the economics to catch up. So right now, this stuff exists in businesses and homes, sure, but it's not nearly as affordable as your washer and dryer. But what if one day it were affordable enough that the average homeowner would have one of these things for their own reasons, and it's not so expensive that it becomes a hurdle?
How do you feel about alternative demand response mechanisms? Like I don't know if you've seen the high powered kitchen stove that's got like a megawatt in it, or even like V2G stuff. That's super interesting to me, Kendrick. I love hearing about the V2X or the V2G space. Since you work every day in demand response, what are your thoughts about the promises of programs like that?
Well, I think vehicle to grid, V2G, is especially interesting, promising, and challenging. Like from a physics standpoint, the battery capacity of rolling batteries here in California on four wheels is enormous. I don't have the number, but I'm willing to bet that the capacity battery of all electric vehicles exceeds that of all utility scale batteries and customer owned batteries combined. It's huge how many EVs there are in California, but we can't necessarily plug them back into the grid because we don't have the, I guess, devices that would convert that DC power into AC, and then also a regulating device, if you will, that converts that AC into something the grid can use in an amount that is safe for your neighborhood and your infrastructure. So we definitely have some things to solve there, but from a pure physics standpoint, yeah, you've got a giant amount of rolling energy here on the roads of California.
Yeah, I've seen some of the electric school buses programs where they're starting to dispatch these as resilience hubs in these communities because it can really help an awful lot in times of disaster or in this instance, like let's say a wildfire in California. How quickly could we bring that 500 megawatts online? Let's say there's a power safety power shutoff and we need to tap into the VPP. Is that something that we can do quickly?
I think one day we can definitely do that quicker than we do now. There is some coordination now. So if, for example, during a PSTS or even a live wildfire event and there's a transmission loss in California, we can definitely activate VPPs around that transmission loss to compensate for the power that could not be delivered that way. And while like V to G is interesting for like, hey, why can't we just roll a bunch of buses up to the zone and plug them in? That's okay. It's relatively fast. It's talking about hours, kind of fast, right? What's even faster is something that's instantaneously at the speed of light, and that would be the batteries that are already on site at businesses and homes in the area. And if we can tap into that in an emergency, even an unforecasted one such as a wildfire, that would provide instantaneous speed of light delivery.
It sounds to me like the key to all of this is batteries. It's just batteries and getting batteries everywhere we can get them. Is that what it's like working for a utility in California right now?
You could say that. I would zoom out one level and challenge maybe your listeners to help solve the problem. We're thinking about storage in general. And storage doesn't have to be just battery, although that is definitely the most promising. But storage is anything that creates inventory in the electric utility space that's never existed before. And you think about normal businesses, inventory is generally taught in business schools as you don't want that. It wastes space, it costs size of capital. Well, electricity happens to take up no space. It also happens to have really good logistics. You can move this thing around at the speed of light from British Columbia to California in the blink of an eye because it moves at the speed of light. So I think the yes, batteries help a big deal, but creating storage for intermittent supply sources is a big deal. And we can do that through even pre-cooling around an event and using your house as a thermal battery. If you pre-cool and then post-cool, that's one possibility too.
We've talked about AI sort of weaved through this conversation, but not really addressing it directly. I know some of the first artificial intelligence software applications are starting to find their way into control rooms out there in California, in particular OATI's Genie. I know that there are other promising applications for AI. How does it impact the demand response world? How are you integrating artificial intelligence in your daily work?
Well, we definitely have some projects that are under non-disclosure agreements right now.
Those are the good ones.
Um,
The NDA
those are the good
projects.
ones. It is
Yeah.
the good ones. But you can imagine that of all the electrical devices out there in the home or in the business, more and more of them are becoming network connected. I mean, it used to be a premium feature if you walked into Home Depot and tried to buy a washer and dryer that connected to your network. Now it's actually pretty hard to find an appliance that doesn't have Wi-Fi. So we're getting to the point where these things will be able to talk to each other, maybe be aware of each other, have an AI coordinate them because they're aware of where they are, when they can turn on, how much energy they can use. And you can imagine that if an AI is aware of all those things, it can actually make those things turn on and off or turn them up and down at times of our choosing. And our choosing would be something that matches the intermittent renewable energy curve with no inconvenience to the customer.
Right, that UX experience is paramount, right? How do you smooth out all that friction though? How do you make it so that you don't notice? That's the tough part.
It is the tough part, and I think that's more of a technological solution, but also an attitude and belief by decision makers that we can do this without inconveniencing the customer. And I think it's possible. So, for example, if Paul, you and I lived on the same block, and there was only two air conditioners on this block, mine and yours, and the rule of this game is they must not turn on at the same time, or else bad things will happen on the grid, or we'll run out of energy. But in the next hour, your air conditioner and my air conditioner actually need to be on 14 minutes in total. So we leave it up to chance. Our thermostats could turn it on for the same 14 minutes, and then we fail the rules of the game. But if my thermostat and your thermostat are aware of each other, they can actually say, hey, Paul, you're going to go take the first 7 minutes. I'm going to take the next 7 minutes. Then you're going to take another 7 minutes. I'm going to take the next 7 minutes. And if that happens, your temperature in the house stays the same. No one knows any different, but we've actually succeeded in the rules of that game. So imagine
Yeah,
that instead of just two of us, there's 100 of us or 2,000.
Yeah, and so it's you can be so much more efficient that way. Obviously, I wonder though if there isn't a consumer sentiment at some point that says, "Well, no, I pay for this electric service to be on whenever I want it, and I want my air conditioner on right now." Uh, how do you bring those stragglers across the finish line and convince them that this is not only what's best for the local grid, but perhaps the entire Western grid, the way that things are looking right now?
Well, I would actually think that most people don't manually care that much about turning the on-off switch for various appliances, including the air conditioner in
That's
their
true.
house,
I don't. I only turn it on or off when it's really bothering me or my wife
right?
tells me to. That's
Right.
those are the
But,
two.
but I wholeheartedly respect that sentiment. If someone wants to opt out of a program, or if someone wants to opt out this hour or just for today, that should be a customer choice, and that's fine. But I'm betting that when we have 1,000, let's say, customers in a pod, that the vast majority of them have better things to do than watch the on-off switch on their thermostat. So if that's the case, a couple of people will opt out. Maybe they need the battery for something else I don't know about, and you know what? I can respect that. It's no problem. But the vast majority of people will be like, hey, I've got better things to do than watch this. Let the AI figure it out.
I bet you're right about that, Kendrick. Football season is now in full swing. We can't talk about the electricity when we've got football on TV. As long as the TV doesn't go off because we lost electricity, and then we've got
That's
a
right.
problem. We're calling up PG&E. You talked a minute ago about hurdles to this legislative. We talked about the consumer adoption hurdle. I'd be curious to hear what you think could change in legislation that would further accelerate the adoption of VPPs in California and beyond.
I think in California, we were the first to do this, especially at scale. So naturally, the regulators have been very cautious in protecting consumer rights, consumer privacy, being really upfront with terms and conditions so everyone knows what the game is. I think we need to take a hard look at balancing those types of security features, which I think are needed to make the customers protected, but also having enrollment so that they're super easy. So if you have to fill out a bunch of forms, Paul, you might do it because you seem like a techie early adopter kind of guy, but not everyone's going to take that time. We're going to make this so easy that it's a couple clicks on your smartphone versus a couple forms you have to fill out. That's one thing that would help out a lot. Another is also making sure that the demand response and load modifying programs in California are efficient and maybe fun to use for customers or invisible to use, and then crafting policies around that. And then lastly, I would say making sure they're economically compensated. So for the listeners, maybe not in California, um, other states may not have an energy market. California has an energy market, much like the stock market, and actually varies by hour or even smaller increments, and the prices go up and down. And you'll find some things are true. On very hot California days and hot West Coast days, energy tends to be more expensive. In the middle of the day when it's blue sky conditions and California has tons of solar, especially in the sunniest parts of inland California, electricity is so cheap it might even be free, as in the pricing goes negative on our markets. We need actually battery and other type of VPP exports to be compensated for in this scheme. And right now there are some rules that make it so that, well, if you own a battery at home, you get compensated up to maybe what you would normally use. But if your battery actually had more to give to your neighborhood, to California, that amount extra on top isn't necessarily compensated by the market. And that is an inefficiency we probably should.
What are some other hurdles to adoption? Are there any technical ones now? You talked about that a little bit with the V2G limitations, getting power from a car battery or a bus battery onto the grid. But in terms of a larger scale VPP deployment, besides the ramp up point that you brought up earlier, is there a technical hurdle or something that we've got to figure out?
There are quite a few, as in every device between your meter and your local electric substation probably was designed for one-way power flow decades ago. Utilities in California have been pretty ahead of it in installing smarter devices, but I think for the maybe the broad view is if you think of a system or a machine that was built 120 years ago, where power flows from a generator far away to the cities and then is consumed in your home or your business, that one-way flow now has to be omnidirectional. And when we absorb the sun and the wind during the day or any other renewable energy source that may be intermittent, it's kind of like this machine now has to take a breath in and then breathe back out. And the grid has to be omnidirectional to do that, not just allowing one-way power flow. So yeah, every single device along the way, whether it be a transformer, your switches on the line, or your breakers at the substation and the substation infrastructure beyond that, have to enable this omnidirectional power flow.
I find that to be one of the more interesting parts of this larger conversation that we're having about having to build the grid 4x or whatever, to meet the load growth that we're hearing about. I find that it's all about compromise, right? Like it's never going to get exactly what you want. If you're a data center client and you want, two gigawatts, you're probably not going to get that for 12 or 15 years. The point of all of this, though, is that everything is changing so fast and utilities are having to make decisions that are very different than the ones they used to make. And so I'm just going to ask you a silly question. If you could tear the whole grid down and start over again and actually make it the right way, would you do it? And might that be faster than some of this, like working in the analog with the new digital?
Sounds like a really fun game to play if you're playing SimCity.
Yeah, right.
But I mean, from a technical design standpoint, yeah, sure. But from an economic standpoint, we can't do that because customers actually have better things to spend their money on, and we want electric bills to stay affordable. So we can't just rip up everything and rebuild the entire state of California overnight. But I think there are ways to do upgrades in a financially responsible way as a utility so that our bills are relatively low in the next couple decades and people can spend their money on more fun things.
Before I let you go, Kendrick, any other plans for a larger VPP deployment? Say that 10 times fast. In the near future, or is that part of the NDA projects as well?
Well, I think you can probably see another test event or real event like what we saw this July in 2025. There's more batteries being installed all the time, both on the utility scale side in front of the meter, but also on the customer and business side behind the meter. I don't foresee that number trending downwards. I only see it trending upwards. So as more of these things are installed, as more thermostats and EV chargers are internet connected, the more of this we can actually dispatch at one time in the future. So yeah, I would say we can look forward to a bigger VPP showing in the years to come.
We'll keep our eyes peeled for it. Would love to talk to you again if the situation arises. But for now, Kendrick Li, Director of Clean Energy Programs at PG&E. Again, I appreciate you taking some time to talk to our listeners. I learned a lot today. I hope those on the other end of this device did too.
Awesome, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, anytime. And if you like the show, please leave some feedback, subscribe, send an email, tell me how terrible I am. paul.gerke@clarionevents.com. Thank you so much, guys. We'll catch you next time.